Kelsey, why are you here today?
I know. Okay, everyone, welcome to our summer jam session today. I'm Kelsey, the content marketing manager at GiveSmart, and we are joined with Frank Giuliano, who is the executive director at Reeves Reed Arboretum in New Jersey. And he is here to chat with us today about the unexpected donor and to share with us the story of his 95-year-old boyfriend, as he likes to call him. So, Frank, if you want to go ahead and start sort of telling us this story about the 95-year-old boyfriend.
Sure, Kelsey. Thanks a lot. So one day I received a letter in the mail, hard copy, snail mail, and it was an issue of stock for about $6,000. I don't remember exactly. It's a couple of years now. And I had no clue who this person was who was donating the stock. So, of course, I go into our database to try to investigate. And there's no record of this man's name or his address or anything about him. So I contacted him directly and asked if I could come over and visit. And I drove over and knocked on his door. And I met with this elderly gentleman who at this point was probably 90. And we chatted briefly and found out that he and his wife were volunteers at Reeves Reed Arboretum, and that he just out of the blue, he's not been connected with the Arboretum for a long time, out of the blue, decided to make this gift. So what struck me right off the bat was, why didn't we have his information in our database? Secondly, what prompted the gift out of the blue? And so I sat with him and we chatted, and it was a very interesting conversation on many levels. He doesn't live in a fancy home. His wife at that time was bedridden in a hospital bed in the dining room, and it was a very humble and humbling visit. And it turned out that this man, I'll call him Mr. Smith, had been following the progress of the Arboretum since I had started there and wanted to acknowledge the progress. Well, I was delighted. I had a great visit. We didn't talk so much about money. We talked about him, his family, his wife, and as a retired engineer, he's also a sculptor. So he showed me a lot of his works. And I left and had a great time. I went back to the Arboretum, and 2 days later, another letter appears with an additional gift of even more stock. And I was completely blown away. So I called him and thanked him again. And he asked me to come by for lunch sometime. And so I made a date. Well, that was, as I said, a number of years ago, and I regularly meet with him for lunch at his house. His wife has since passed, and we talk about everything in the world, politics, philosophy. We have a great time, but what has happened in that time is we have built up a relationship that goes far beyond just a typical donor. We're friends, and we count on visiting with each other. And his gifts have continued, substantial gifts. When his wife died, he particularly took, he named 4 trees in her honor. That's a significant donation. He's always donating, and actually has said to me, "Don't worry, you'll get it all when I die." And at 95, I hope he lasts for another 10, 20 years. He's the sweetest man.
Oh, that's a really specific story and so touching. And I wonder, I don't know if he shared with you kind of what prompted that first gift. I know if he was a volunteer in the past, maybe it seems like, to me, it kind of sounds like there were years that had gone by before anything happened. And then you just decided to send that, or?
Well, he remained on our e-blast. He remained on our e-blast list, and he remained on our part somewhat in our active donor list, even though he had never given anything before. He was a prospect. And I think it was the combination of the extreme shift in our organization when I was able to come in and take hold. Because for many years we were very inwardly driven. We were I hate to use the word exclusive, but there was a sense of a private garden club organization as opposed to something that's a service organization. And he responded to that shift. And his initial gift was a direct response to seeing those e-blasts and seeing how the organization was being more personal and more focused on serving people.
More of like a community space rather than
in the broadest sense.
More of a community space than a private space.
Yes, but in the broadest sense, the community all of a sudden expanded, as opposed to just being the community of Summit. It was now the greater community, which kept on growing and growing and growing.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's just a really special story, and it's always nice. And I think that I think a lot of organizations kind of, at least I've heard or seen this, are your volunteers often your donors as well? And, I think sometimes people donate time and money, and then this kind of seems like a situation where he maybe gave time for a lot of years and now he's giving money. Or do you find with your donors that it's, it's often one or the other, or do they give both?
Well, that's a great question, and you've hit on something very important. Volunteers need to be acknowledged, and when you acknowledge a volunteer, you lay the groundwork for potential donations, because what you're doing is you're building a sense of ownership with that volunteer, that they have an investment not only of their time, but eventually of their circle of friends and potentially their income. We now, as a result of thinking more and more about volunteers and their integral part they play in our community here, we offer volunteers membership to the Arboretum free of charge after they've completed a certain number of hours. So there's this goal that they reach. And when they reach that goal, they are, actively pursued as members of the community.
Cool, nice. I like that. That they then feel even more connected to it. So I don't know if there's anything specific that you wanted to share about kind of how you've been putting maybe his specific donations to use, or are there any over the last few years, projects that kind of tied into? I know you said he, named some trees in his wife's honor, which obviously will continue to stand and serve the Arboretum, but I didn't know if there's anything else specific kind of in his memory that is tied to the Arboretum.
Well, there are two things. The obvious, of course, is general operating funds. This oftentimes donations, especially Mr. Smith's donations, go into general operating funds. He has specifically helped me in my accessibility project that I'm trying to create at the Arboretum. My goal is to make the grounds fully accessible to people of all abilities. Right now, if you have any limitations or anything that hampers your mobility, you do not have access to what is the core of our purpose here. And so that's changing, but it's a slow process. And we talk about it, he and I, often over our lunches. And every once in a while, a gift will come that's specifically targeted to help me in that area. But for the most part, his gifts are general operating, which is a godsend to an organization like ours. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Frank. And that's just a really lovely story to share, and always like to hear stories with close donors. So, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.